Ever wondered what people in the past thought was entirely ordinary? Or how they lived their lives without the technology we take for granted today? In this thrilling journey, we will dust off the cobwebs of history and rediscover the forgotten quirks and eccentricities of our ancestors. From bizarre medical recommendations that defy modern standards to unusual pastimes that would leave you questioning sanity, our past holds countless surprises waiting to be unraveled. Get ready to explore the enigma of bygone times as we unveil 20 unusual things from the past that were once considered normal. Number 20. Bizarre laws that criminalized existence. From 1867 to 1974, some cities in the United States had laws that had the strangest view of reality. Can you believe it? These laws actually made it illegal for poor and disabled folks to exist in public. You heard that right. Existing was a crime. Take San Francisco, for example. In 1867, they had this law that said anyone who was diseased, maimed, or mutilated couldn't show themselves to the public. Unless, of course, they were part of a demonstration, like some sort of disabled showcase. How ridiculous. And get this, even a simple limp had to be kept hidden. If you were caught exposing your disability, you get a fine of $1, which may not sound like much, but today that's over 20 bucks. Imagine being fined just for existing. But hey, fear not, the world finally got its act together. In 1974, Chicago was the last city to repeal these wacky laws. Thankfully, we've come a long way since then, and now we can all exist in peace and harmony. Phew, what a wild journey it's been. Number 19. The mad surgeons of the 19th century. Did you know about the wild and wacky world of 19th century medicine? Back then, surgeries were like high-speed roller coasters mixed with a comedy of errors. Imagine surgeons running around like they're in a race against time, trying to finish a surgery in just 10 minutes or less. Why the rush? Well, because anesthesia wasn't a thing and patients had to be awake during these terrifying procedures. Imagine having your leg chopped off while you scream in agony and 5 assistants hold you down like a wrestling match gone wrong. And let's not forget about the hygiene. It was so bad that the surgeons might as well have performed surgeries in a dumpster. In the midst of all this madness, there was a surgeon named Robert Liston, famous for being the fastest knife in the West End. He could amputate a leg in the blink of an eye. From the first cut to the last stitch, he was like a surgical ninja. But with great speed came great disaster. One time, he accidentally chopped off his assistant's finger along with the patient's leg. Oops. And guess what? Blood contamination was a thing, but they had no clue about it back then. In another thrilling performance, Liston managed to achieve a jaw-dropping 300% mortality rate. Yes, you heard that right. 3 people died during one single surgery. That's like a bad magic trick gone horribly wrong. 3 corpses appear out of thin air. But hey, Liston wasn't all bad. He did invent some cool stuff like see-through isinglass, sticking plaster, and a leg splint for fixing broken bones. Plus, he introduced chloroform as an anesthetic, so at least patients could sleep through the pain in later years. Overall, 19th century surgeries were like a circus act mixed with a tragedy. It's hard to believe that people preferred this chaos over other surgeons. But hey, they say laughter is the best medicine, and we've got plenty to laugh about from those bizarre and hilarious times. Number 18. Resurrection experiments. On November 4th, 1818, a big crowd gathered at the University of Glasgow's Medical Theatre for an extraordinary event. They were there to see the reanimation of a recently executed man named Matthew Clydesdale, thanks to a guy named Andrew Urey, who had some shocking ideas. You see, back in 1751, Scotland had this law that sent the corpses of executed people to medical schools for research. Urey, a geology pioneer with a wild imagination, believed he could bring a dead person back to life using electricity. Yeah, frogs' muscles twitched with electric shocks, so why not humans, right? With hope and doubt in the air, Urey started the experiment. He connected a battery to the corpse's spine and sent high-voltage discharges. Lo and behold, the corpse moved. But it wasn't quite the living reanimation Urey hoped for. The crowd got a bit queasy as they saw the corpse's scary facial expressions. Undeterred, Urey attempted to make the dead man breathe again. He gave the lungs a jolt, and surprisingly, they sort of worked. Sadly, he couldn't fully bring the man back to life due to some major blood loss. But, hey, Yuri said he would have succeeded if not for that pesky detail. Thankfully, we've come a long way since then, and modern medicine knows better than to mess with reanimating the dead. No creepy experiments are allowed in the 21st century. So let's stick to regular life-saving methods and leave the spooky stuff for Halloween. Number 17. Radathor. Back in the early 20th century, medicine was in a wacky experimental phase. Doctors thought it was a brilliant idea to prescribe some seriously forbidden stuff for all sorts of illnesses. Imagine taking toxic potions for your health today. Crazy, right? But wait, the real kicker was this bizarre potion called Radathor, which combined radium with water. Yes, radioactive water. It was supposed to cure the living dead. Who comes up with this stuff? Now, the guy behind this madness, William Bailey, dropped out of medical school, but that didn't stop him from acting like a certified doctor. He and his team of chemists believed that small doses of radium mixed with water could do wonders for the body. Talk about crazy science. They sold Radathor all over the US, and people were desperate enough to try it. They claimed it enhanced the body's vital processes, and doctors even prescribed it, probably hoping for a miracle. But honestly, it was likely just the placebo effect. People felt better because they believed they would. One unfortunate soul, Eben Byers, started taking Radathor and he got hooked. He went from a spoonful a day to 3 whole bottles. Yikes! But after 4 years, his jaw literally fell off due to radiation damage. Yes, his jaw just disintegrated. Poor Byers didn't feel much pain because the nerves were shot too. In the end, Radathor's creator was shut down, but it was too late for Byers. Even after his death, his body remained radioactive for 33 years. Talk about a mad science experiment gone wrong. Remember, folks, always check with a real doctor before trying any crazy potions. Number 16. From baby CEO to tiny superheroes. Back in the good old days, babies were like a 2-for-1 deal. Half cute little future workers, half insurance policy for parents' golden years. They started their careers right out of the crib, multitasking like pros, helping on farms or businesses. As the world got fancy, kids adapted too. They joined all sorts of industries, even the tough ones like mining, where they got their hands dirty hauling coal. Coastal towns had the tiniest fishermen and oyster shuckers around, and cities had an army of kiddos making everything from glassware to cigars. They were like little superheroes, buzzing around as mini drivers, mini cleaners, and mini newsies. But hold on a minute. Who was reaping all these rewards? Not the kids? Nope, they worked hard, but their wallets stayed slim. Society saw them as walking piggy banks for their parents. Imagine a world where babies had business cards like Baby Smith, CEO of Mama Industries. We'd have board meetings at the Sandbox discussing the latest in milk bottle technology. Ah, the good old child labor days, where kids were like tiny working wonders, but without the payday fun. Number 15. Thirsty for trouble. In a wild turn of events on January 17, 1920, the U.S. decided to ban alcohol sales after a long campaign by the teetotalers, claiming it would improve society. But boy, were they mistaken. America transformed into a crazy funhouse mirror version of itself. The government seemed bent on poisoning its citizens, while the cops and politicians took orders from the mafia and the KKK. Quite the circus. Prohibition faced instant resistance. Maryland was like, nah, not enforcing this. And many other places didn't bother funding enforcement either. Turns out banning booze didn't quench the thirst for it. A sneaky market popped up, and bootleggers and mafia bosses made a fortune selling the prohibited nectar. They had so much dough that they could bribe police officers openly. Corruption party, anyone? Prohibition had some dark origins too, fueled by racist and anti-immigrant attitudes. It only helped the KKK terror campaign to make a comeback. Thirsty Americans risked everything to get a taste of beer, sometimes even their lives. The homemade booze, like bathtub gin, turned out to be a silent killer, causing 4 times more deaths than alcohol did before the ban. The feds even raised the deadly methanol levels in industrial alcohols used for homemade liquor. Will Rogers hit the nail on the head, saying the government went from murdering with bullets to doing it with courts. What a time to be alive. Number 14. The dark saga of Yersinia pestis. Yersinia pestis, the rockstar bacteria, hit the stage with a killer name, the Black Death. It rocked the 14th century so hard that a third of Europe's audience was wiped out. But hold on, this party didn't stop there. Even in the 20th century, the bubonic plague kept popping up like a persistent encore, causing over 1,000 cases in the US. This plague is like a flea circus where tiny performers spread chaos through their bites. And guess what? Rats are the flea's ride to stardom. Those rats hitchhiked on steamships to San Francisco, starting their own plague party in the city's Chinatown. Now here's where things get shady. San Francisco's leaders decided to pull off a massive cover-up. They didn't want the rest of the country to know about the outbreak, so they conspired like villains in a B-movie. They even got the Surgeon General in on the act, making it a full-blown plague conspiracy. But not all cities panicked and hid under the covers. Galveston, Texas, faced the plague like a boss. They hunted down the real culprits, those pesky rats, and went on a 2-year rat-killing spree to end the outbreak, with only 11 casualties. Who knew bacteria and rats could put on such a show? Let's hope they retire their act for good, leaving us to enjoy our modern rock and roll without any more medieval surprises. Number 13, Marshall Sutton. In 1944, a young idealist named Marshall Sutton, eager to help his country without fighting in the war due to his religious beliefs, stumbled upon a peculiar brochure. It asked, "Will you starve, that they'd be better fed?" The University of Minnesota was conducting a medical experiment to understand hunger better. Marshall thought, why not identify with the world's suffering and put himself in a little danger? The experiment gathered 36 brave volunteers, including Marshall. They were fed well initially, but then subjected to drastic rations. Only cabbage, turnips, and beans on some days. To make it more challenging, they had to walk or run 22 miles every week, which burned over 1,000 calories, a real test for such a limited diet. The men's appetites suffered, and some couldn't resist bakeries along the way. 3 participants quit, while the rest lost 25% of their body weight. They became anemic, their ankles swollen, and suffered from apathy and exhaustion. They even started reading cookbooks, settling for imagining food. Though the experiment came too late to prevent starvation horrors during the war, it wasn't entirely useless. It helped scientists learn how to treat starving people more effectively. The results are now compiled in a book called Men and Hunger, offering advice to aid workers dealing with those suffering from hunger. Number 12, government-backed racism. Eugenics, that weird pseudoscience from back in the day. Can you believe governments actually thought they could improve us through racism? They were more into breeding programs for humans than making their lives better. Talk about priorities. Imagine the American Natural History Museum's president saying, "Hey, let's make sure races stick to their own kind and not mix it up." They were all about keeping things separate, like a bizarre dating app for species. Even the Supreme Court got in on the action. Justice Holmes thought it'd be better to sterilize people instead of waiting for them to commit crimes or starve. Like, what? That's not how you create a better society. And don't get us started on Planned Parenthood and the American Civil Liberties Union joining the eugenics party. Teddy Roosevelt and Alexander Graham Bell jumped on the bandwagon, too. They were like, let's create a master race. California went full-on crazy with over 20,000 sterilizations. They were all like, no mixing, no mingling, just pure Californians. Thank goodness those wild ideas are in the past. Let's leave eugenics behind and focus on building a better world where everyone gets a fair shot at happiness. Number 11, mental health madness. Oh dear, healthcare for women and mental health care a century ago were like something out of a wild science fiction story by Philip K. Dick. Can you believe it? Back then, they thought psychiatric treatments were the bee's knees, but they were more like sci-fi gone wrong. Picture this. They were so obsessed with science and new technology that they thought sterilizing mentally ill folks was a trendy idea. Can you imagine? Eugenic supporters were all about stopping mentally ill people from getting married or having kids. And then there was that crazy insulin shock therapy for schizophrenia. They pumped patients with insulin, risking brain damage. Yikes! One nutty doctor even blamed the mental illness on infections and went around removing teeth, tonsils, and even organs. It was like he was playing a deadly game of operation. But wait, there's more. Electroshock therapy was all the rage, shocking the wits out of patients to induce seizures. Shocking, right? And believe it or not, some doctors blamed women's reproductive organs for driving them insane. So, they locked up women for anything men didn't like being too outspoken or independent. Thankfully, times have changed, and we now have more sensible and humane approaches to mental health care. But hey, let's remember these weird and wacky beliefs from the past and be grateful for how far we've come. Number 10. Bizarre medical recommendations. The wonders of pregnancy. It may bring about various peculiar bodily challenges, one of which is the commonly dreaded constipation. Nowadays, we are more knowledgeable and recommend adopting a healthy diet or considering a fiber supplement to alleviate the discomfort. But let's travel back in time about 50 years ago. Back then, doctors had some rather peculiar advice for pregnant ladies. Can you believe it? They recommended smoking cigarettes. Yep, Dr. Alan F. Goodmacher, a legit expert, wrote a book telling moms-to-be to puff away for a smooth pregnancy. And that wasn't all. Moderate drinking was also considered okay. Who needs logic, right? But wait, there's more. These wise doctors were so concerned about unsightly weight gain that they set a strict 20-pound limit. Gosh, heaven forbid a woman looks pregnant while pregnant. They even had a genius lunch skipping and skimmed milk with a crackers plan for those who dared to put on a few extra pounds. So if you were born in the late 60s and turned out a bit peculiar, you might have this delightful character, Dr. Goodmacher, to thank for your quirky traits. Oh, what a time to be alive. Thank goodness we've come a long way since then, and now we actually care about keeping our little ones and their mamas healthy and happy. No more smoking for baby bumps. Number 9. Homes for disobedient wives. Talk about the good old days of American progress. Back in the day, they had some wacky ideas about how to handle folks with a few screws loose. If you were a woman with an independent thought or two, or maybe just a teeny doubt about your all-knowing husband, congrats! You got a one-way ticket to the insane asylum. Those places were like dungeons, not resorts. Imagine spending your golden years in deplorable conditions just because your hubby didn't want to deal with a divorce. But hey, not just ladies ended up there. Some genuinely troubled souls got dumped in those pits too. Thankfully, times started changing when psychotherapy came around. Turns out that talking about your feelings is way better than rotting away in an asylum. Who knew, right? Plus, society finally realized that tossing people into dungeons isn't exactly the friendliest approach. So let's raise a toast to progress. Goodbye to asylums and farewell to orphanages for little kids, too. We're moving on to better, more compassionate ways of dealing with life's challenges. Hooray for that. Number 8. Trick or treat evolution. Long before spooky Halloween, people celebrated a quirky version of Thanksgiving. Instead of feasting, they wore hilarious costumes and dashed through the streets, demanding candy like wild, sugar-crazed beings. A 19th century article in the LA Times spilled the beans, revealing that Thanksgiving was once the golden time for mask and fake face manufacturers. Talk about a bizarre trend. Those mischievous, candy-hungry kids caused a ruckus. In fact, they annoyed adults so much that New York school superintendent grumbled about it, feeling like the tradition was purposefully designed to irritate grown-ups. Not the most modern thing to do, huh? But kids being kids, they refused to give up on their candy-getting antics. Eventually, by the 1930s, the hunt for treats transformed into what we now know as Halloween. It became a more organized affair to prevent vandalism and chaos. So the catchphrase trick or treat emerged, signifying that if they got sweets, they wouldn't play tricks. Thanksgiving sure had its wild days, and though the costumes and candy may have moved to Halloween, the spirit of fun and mischief lives on. So remember the time when Thanksgiving was an unexpectedly quirky costume extravaganza. Number 7. When cigarettes cured asthma. You won't believe the hilarious medical advice from doctors a century ago. Back then, they not only turned a blind eye to smoking's risks, but also sang praises in tobacco ads. Can you imagine? Smoke cigarettes for temporary asthma relief, they said with a straight face. Seriously, were they on some kind of smoke-induced cloud? Cigarette companies played a sneaky game. People were catching on to the fact that smoking could be harmful, duh. So, they roped in doctors to endorse their smoky sticks. Nationwide surveys claimed more doctors preferred Camels over any other cigarette. Wait, doctors choosing Camels? Are we talking about the humpbacked desert animals or the smoking sticks? It's all so bizarre. But guess what? The comedy continued well into the 60s. Only then did the Surgeon General step in and say, "Hey, smoking is actually bad for you." No kidding, Sherlock. 100,000 doctors had already ditched the puff, which is pretty telling. So if your doc gives you iffy advice, just remember the funny days when they lit up and said, "You can too." Thank goodness we're smarter now, right? Number 6, professional waker-uppers. Back in the day, before alarm clocks saved us from oversleeping disasters, folks had some hilarious tactics to rise and shine. Some geniuses practiced over-drinking or chugging gallons of water before bed, just to guarantee an early morning bathroom break. Imagine waking up with a splash. Talk about motivation. But wait, it gets better. In the UK and Ireland, they had a fancy profession called the knocker-upper. Oh yeah, not what you think. These brave souls wandered around the neighborhood, wielding long sticks like they were on a secret mission, tapping on people's windows. You can imagine the look of confusion on folks' faces when they saw someone poking at their glass at the crack of dawn. No wonder some residents had a stash of bricks ready for those intrusive tappers. Believe it or not, the knocker-uppers roamed the streets until the 1970s. Seems like getting woken up with a gentle tap was way better than the monstrous shriek from modern-day alarm clocks. So next time you complain about your alarm, just be thankful you're not dodging flying bricks. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Now, let's delve into today's fascinating topic. This captivating image of Mary Anders prompts us to reflect on the arduous journey women endured, managing periods before the modern conveniences of pads, tampons, and menstrual cups. It's hard to fathom how they coped without these innovations. In the 1800s, disposable pads were a recent development, and earlier menstrual cup prototypes were crafted from aluminum or hard rubber. However, even more surprising is the use of moss as a common resource for absorption. Though moss was readily available, its lack of hygiene raises eyebrows today. Physicians believed in its antiseptic properties, and desperate times called for its use even on battlefields to control bleeding. Menstruation, once viewed as witchcraft, was both misunderstood and feared. In those perilous times, resourcefulness was vital, leading to the reuse of materials like moss. This image serves as a powerful reminder of the progress made over time, ensuring women's menstrual experiences are safer, more comfortable, and no longer shrouded in ignorance and stigma. Were you aware that in the 1800s, disposable pads were a recent development and earlier menstrual cup prototypes were crafted from aluminum or hard rubber? Comment below. Number 5, beauty products. Oh, the good old days of beauty products. Can you believe they used to put radium in them? Yes, you heard that right. The same stuff that glows in the dark. They claimed it had magical properties like making your skin glow and eliminating wrinkles. Liquid sunshine, they called it. Imagine slathering radioactive cream on your face, hoping for a youthful glow. But wait, it gets even crazier. They also added thorium, another radioactive element, to their toothpaste and soaps. Who needs regular toothpaste when you can have a radioactive smile, right? And to make things even more absurd, they named their products after Dr. Alfred Curie, trying to fool people into thinking it was endorsed by the famous scientist Marie Curie, who actually discovered radium. Talk about sneaky marketing. Sure, people in the past had some bizarre ideas, but thankfully, we've come a long way since then. Beauty products nowadays focus on natural ingredients that actually work without any radioactive side effects. So, let's leave the radium in the history books and embrace safer and better ways to take care of our skin. Number 4, radium's radiant deception. As we delve deeper into history, we come across a fascinating era where radium's malevolent effects seem to have reached a peak. Yet the allure of radiation captivated the masses, akin to a miraculous elixir. People fervently believed in its ability to remedy various issues, going so far as to consider it a solution for hair removal and other challenges. Imagine using X-rays to zap away unwanted hair. Talk about being creative. But hey, back then, nobody knew the potential risks, so everyone jumped on the radiation bandwagon. There was this famous tricho machine that shot direct X-rays at people's faces to get rid of facial hair. Women in the US were all over it, getting around 20 treatments each. Sure, the hair fell out, but little did they know that their skin was taking a serious beating. Years later, the consequences hit them like a ton of bricks. Pigmentation issues, keratosis, carcinoma, and sadly, even death. Ouch! That's not the kind of glow-up they were expecting. Thankfully, the radiation craze got some serious reality checks when radioactive products started causing toxic trouble in the 1920s and 1930s. Even the legendary Marie Curie, the radioactivity queen, didn't escape its grasp. In the end, people finally opened their eyes to the dangers and learned that maybe, just maybe, radiation wasn't the cure, all they thought it was, and so the quest for smoother skin and safer solutions continued. Number 3. The fascinating world of death photography. You know, back in the early 20th century, people had some really strange and creepy traditions. One of the weirdest was taking pictures of dead people, acting like they were still alive. Can you believe it? Death was all over the place in those days. Epidemics left people constantly bumping into the deceased. And when Queen Victoria lost her husband, mourning became a fashion statement. They even had these trinkets called memento mori, which literally meant, remember you must die. Talk about a gloomy accessory. They took things to a whole new level with these pictures of the departed. Hair locks from the dead were turned into jewelry, like lockets and rings. There were even death masks and wax figures. Paintings and sculptures couldn't escape the obsession with death symbols either. Then came photography, and people got really serious about capturing their loved ones, even if they were 6 feet under. Open caskets were common, but they wanted the dead to look lively. Some went as far as drawing eyes on the pictures of the deceased faces, and kids were posed like they were just chilling on a couch. It's a weird mix of weird and funny. You have to admit, people back then had some peculiar tastes. Number 2. Garden hermits. You won't believe what folks used to spruce up their gardens before those adorable garden gnomes were all the rage. Back in the 18th century, wealthy estate owners got creative and hired real people as garden hermits. Yes, you heard that right. Actual people living like druids, growing their hair long and giving up washing for years. These hermits settled into shacks, caves, and other cozy shelters designed to impress visitors. The interior was meticulously planned. Picture a hermit's cave with a skull, a book, and even spectacles next to them, all symbols of wisdom. Talk about eccentric decorations. Guests would ring a bell outside the hermit's dwelling and then enter to be greeted by this unique character. To look the part, the hermits donned conical hats that might have inspired today's garden gnomes, but were once considered dunces' hats. Hey, they were just being trendy. It may seem like a strange job, but being an ornamental hermit was a popular gig in 18th century England. These hermits had it easy, getting paid only at the end of their contract. But everything from food to lodging was provided. Not a bad way to escape the challenges of regular jobs and enjoy some peaceful solitude. So next time you spot a garden gnome, remember, they have a quirky history rooted in the colorful world of 18th century garden hermits. Number 1. Harvard prank spiraled into an unofficial championship. Back in 1939, a freshman named Lothrop Withington Jr. at Harvard thought he could impress his buddies with a fishy tale. He boasted that he had gobbled up a live fish. Do you know what happened next? Yep, a bet was made, $10 no less. Well, that little prank spiraled out of control, just like a freshman trying to impress everyone. Lothrop found himself standing in front of a crowd of smirking friends, with at least one reporter from Boston there to witness the madness. And guess what? He actually dropped 2 poor goldfish into his mouth, gave it a little shake, and gulped. Down they went, scales and all. As you can imagine, the news spread like wildfire, and suddenly, colleges all over the country were caught up in this crazy goldfish-eating craze. It went from 1 fish to 25 at the University of Pennsylvania, and a student at MIT took it to the next level by swallowing 42. And it wasn't just the guys in on the action, even the girls joined the competition. But the real winner, or maybe the loser of this unofficial championship, was Joseph DeLiberato from Clark University, who swallowed a staggering 89 goldfish in one sitting. Poor fish indeed. Which of these past practices would you consider the most bizarre and shocking in today's world? Leave your answer in the comments below.